Welcome to my home, Palazzo Drago, and this exploration of the relationship between the human brain and music, and how it is that the musical mind is created. My name is Dr. Duane. I'm a behavioral neurologist, formerly associate professor at the Mayo Medical School, currently professor at Arizona State University. I chair the physicians for the Phoenix Symphony, and I'm proud to be a member of the New York Academy of Sciences that has sponsored several conferences in the last decade that have brought together scientists from all over the world to study and examine the relationship between human brain structure and function and the capacity to make and to respond to music. To do so, we'll do it in 4 parts. Prelude, and we'll look at the way we define music and how it evolved as a concept over the ages. Then we will look at the structure of the human nervous system, because we must know that if we're going to look at the relationship of brain to music. Then in Largo, we'll look at how we can study the intact human being as he or she listens to music or creates music, and see the brain in action with various aspects of response to or creation of components of music. And then we will look at disease states that can rob the human of his or her capacity to create or to react to various components of music. In Adagio, our second part, movement, we will look at the development of humans and our early capacity already to distinguish salient characteristics of music and how it evolves in individuals who are trained and individuals who are not trained in music. And then in our final section, the third movement, Allegro, we will look at the emotional response that is unique to music that is not present to human speech. And we will look at what distinguishes the nervous system of the trained musician, because it is different on the basis of their training as well as their natural gift. Is it fair for us to take science and look at art? Well, let's examine this quote from a very famous individual. There is no science without fancy. There is no art without facts. Vladimir Nabokov. And you see Nabokov here with a butterfly net because he was an entomologist. There is a butterfly named after him. And when he came to America originally, he was not as a professor of literature, but as a biology professor at Wellesley. But his point is well taken. There is no science without creativity as we know it in the arts. And there is no artistic endeavor that is not rule-governed or requires structured discipline in its creation. That we will use as we examine the relationship between the brain and music. To begin, prelude. If we're going to talk about music and the brain, we need to define music. What does the word mean? What is its derivation? Because it's a very interesting history of that term. And if we're going to talk about its relationship to the brain, we must know something about the anatomy, not the detail, but something in general about the structure of the central nervous system, the human brain. Well, how do we define music? What is this art? Back in 1712, it was Leibniz who said, "Music is the hidden mathematical endeavor of a soul unconscious it is calculating." And notice this reference to a mathematical relationship between music and arithmetic. In contemporary acoustic science, it's been defined as ordered, non-speech sound. Edgar Varese called it organized sound. If we go to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the science or art of combining tones into a composition having structure and continuity, vocal or instrumental sounds having rhythm, melody, or harmony, an agreeable sound, the opposite of noise, which is a disturbing or unpleasant sound. And it was J.J. Nietzsche who said, "The border between music and noise is culturally defined." If we go to our Wikipedia, here's a definition we get: an artistic form of auditory communication incorporating instrumental or vocal tones in a structured and continuous manner. I like that one. Yet the Harvard Dictionary of Music that most of us use as a reference text has no definition of music. What's the source, the etymology of the word music? Well, of course, it comes from the Greek, musici, technici, and in Latin, musica. The origin comes from the Greek muses, and of course, the muse for music was Calliope. And the muses worked with any art or science that was assigned to them. There were 9 of them. The various forms of drama as well as music were key in the assignment of the role of the muses. And they've been used as a source of inspiration to artists in those various fields. In Rome, ancient Rome, ars musica included poetry. And how appropriate, because this is musical language that has what we call prosody. In the European Middle Ages, music was part of the mathematical quadrivium: arithmetics, geometry, astronomy, musica. Boethius in the 5th century AD said there are 3 types of music: musica universalis, musica humana, musica instrumentalis, the performed sound, that which you and I listen to by CD, MP3, or in a concert hall. Now, here's the title of one of the texts published by the New York Academy of Science, bringing together scientists from around the world, investigating this question: what are the biological foundations of music? Well, as this diagram, somewhat complicated, but let's reduce it to the simple forms. In each ear, there is an organization of sound, as there is where it will end up on the top of the temporal lobe. But note this, that as soon as music enters the central nervous system, as well as speech sounds, they immediately cross to the opposite side. So that should we, by some misfortune, be deaf in one ear, still, each side, right and left of the brain, from the one surviving ear, will receive acoustic information. And as we can hear now, both the middle ear and the superior temporal lobe are organized as follows. So, at the level of the middle ear, sound is organized this way, like a keyboard. The sound ascends up the brain stem to the superior surface of the temporal lobe, and once again, sound is organized like a keyboard. You and I have a keyboard in our head. Music on and in the mind. As we listen to music, it's processed, as we're about to see, in many different areas of our brain. The extent of the brain's involvement was scarcely imagined until the early 1990s, because it's then when functional brain imaging became possible. Functional means we could image the brain as it was at work in the living person, no longer confined to the cadaver and the post-mortem examination. Let's look at some of the key areas of the brain superficially now. We needn't go in great detail, but along the center part that we see a motor and sensory strip that allows our hands and oral structures to be felt and to be coordinated, moved by us. In the prefrontal cortex is where we have localized our expectation of what sound will be like. In an area called nucleus accumbens on the inner surface near the front of the so-called temporal lobe. Think of it from the standpoint of our temple is where the temporal lobe is. Here, emotional reactions to music, as well as just behind it in the amygdala, or old brain as some have called it. Down at the bottom, the cerebellum, which means little brain, is where coordination of muscular movement occurs, and as we've learned in recent years, it's involved in new learning as well. In the back, as we'll see some vivid examples of, is the visual cortex. So as you and I read music, it is this area of the brain that is being activated. Along the inner surface of that temporal lobe is the hippocampus. Here is a structure so essential to memory, and it is the one that suffers first as people develop Alzheimer's disease. And as we see, there's an inverted C deep in the middle of the brain, and it is the corpus callosum, that is the cross bridge that lets the right hand know what the left hand is doing, as it were. Here, the right and left brain communicate through this fiber network. Here we're seeing three facial images. They represent speech sounds. The same may be true for affective information, where someone is angry, happy, sad. How do we interpret that information? Curiously, it is the brain that does this for us. And in this example, where we see the line marked control, is where you and I are, the average individual, as we are reacting to a visual stimulus. Notice how quickly these jagged lines appear vertically. Just below AS, the autistic spectrum, where individuals have great difficulty in interpreting the sounds of speech that represent affective information, emotion, have trouble with interpreting facial movements and what they represent emotionally, and may have difficulty in interpreting the emotional content of music as well. So a physical difference between groups of individuals, those with and without an impairment of the ability to emotionally react to music. That area, shown in various colors, just shows us over the surface of the brain, where the so-called mirror system, we see as if we were looking in a mirror, and our brain can replicate that from within ourselves. That being the case, individuals who are robbed of this system oftentimes seem affectless, flat affect, no emotion in their face or in their voice. The mirror system is not working well for them.